Hello, welcome to another episode of Forgotten Cemeteries of the Pacific Northwest. Today we are in Gaston, Oregon in Washington County. It's just off of Spring Hill Road. His town with a lot of history, actually. Alternative names for this cemetery are East Gaston, Almeron Hill, The Hill, and Wapato. It's kind of down this gravel road off the main road. So let's check it out and let's visit some of the local residents and hear their story. Well, we finally arrived. I had to make my way up a pretty steep gravel hill road. A bit of a challenge. I just kind of parked on a little dirt path here. It's not a whole lot of room. They do have a driveway here. So, a little bit about Hill Cemetery. It's not named for the location per se. It's named after a family that we'll talk about later because it is located on a hill. As you can see, it's a beautiful view with the sun blasting into the camera, so apologies that there's a glare. Some very important Oregon individuals are buried here that nobody's ever heard of. It's a little interesting reading about the history of the town of Gaston. It was established, Hill Cemetery was established in 1849. I just put unknown for how many graves were here. I did see a number that was well over 700. I put unknown because this cemetery did have a bit of a rough history. During the 1900s, a wildfire swept through the area. It ended up destroying several of the old wooden crosses and markers because that's what they used back in the day. Most were replaced, but apparently many of them were off the memory of the local townspeople. They said, I think John's up there. Maybe. I just put a marker. So it's kind of something along those lines. Unfortunately, many of the volunteers that once took care of the cemetery are just long gone and dead themselves. The cemetery board actually disbanded, and the person who owned the property died during this time frame, leaving the cemetery unowned and unattended. I went to the City of Gaston website and it said to contact a Gmail account for questions about the cemetery. You know, usually when you go to like City of Gaston, for example, or Portland, emails typically have like .gov or .org attached to them. So most likely maybe a volunteer takes care of this. I just thought it was a little strange. I guess that's why I named my channel Forgotten Cemeteries. Pardon the pun, but cemeteries are literally dead and forgotten with the rise of environmental sustainability and cremation. Alright, just met the coolest couple in the world. I got a few pointers for future cemeteries to visit, so thank you to you if you're watching. I love the dog too. So here we have Joseph Evan Pugh. I think that's how you say it. This would be a Civil War veteran. I believe he came to Oregon in 1870. You can see here we have Thomas Seth with his wife, Eliza Lee. Thomas was a Scottish immigrant, and Eliza Lee, was a pioneer. They were married on September 16th, 1864. I wonder if this tombstone was rebuilt recently. Looks pretty clean and great shape. Well, I walked past this one about 40 times. A lot of the headstones around here are pretty weathered. It's getting difficult to find the individuals I want to, but this one has excellent writing on it and it sticks out like a sore thumb, and I have no clue how I missed it, but I will do my best to find the others. William Martin Dowdy was born in Tennessee in 1812. He was a free trapper in the Rocky Mountains. He joined up with a group of trappers traveling to Oregon, and he settled in this area in 1841 with his wife. He was classified as the best hunter and trapper in the area during this time, to the point he was placed in charge of the eradication of wolves in the area, ran a successful bounty program, and people took notice of this. He was the first man to be elected in the public office at Champouie, Oregon, Oregon's first provisional government. He was also responsible for land claims, bounties, and budgeting. He was only 31 at the time. It's a pretty tall order. And what the? Spelled government wrong? All right, moving on. Shampoo at the time was a town of 200 and it was established in the year 1843. However, this would be short-lived. There was a great flood of 1861 that pretty much washed away the town. As you can see here, William died in 1872. He was married to Mary Martha Pigeon Shoshone. Allegedly, they had 10 children together. She was born in Green Valley, Wyoming, actually. Checking the Oregon State Archives, it lists their ethnicity as Shoshone Indian. Looking them up, they're mainly located in Wyoming and Idaho. I did read some of them are down in Texas, where I guess they eventually formed Comanche. This is actually something that wasn't in my notes, but I thought it was a cool headstone. You can see here, this is the Myers. I believe this is the husband and wife buried, but if you walk on the back of the tombstone, they have children of this union buried here. And as you can see, a lot of young deaths here. Looks like we got a good 6 of them. Interesting. I'm assuming that's the children buried next to this. And finally, for who the cemetery is named after, Sarah and Almeron Hill. I'll start with Sarah. She was born in 1823 in Indianapolis, Indiana. She lived in Oregon longer than any other pioneer living woman at the time, actually. She's often referred to as the Queen of Pioneers. She was married to a gentleman named Almeron Hill, we'll talk about in a little bit. They would marry in 1841 in Missouri and would travel to Oregon together in 1843. They arrived in Yamhill County and lived there until her husband died. They were together 60 years, longer than any known Oregon couple at the time. Sarah would obviously die in 1913, as you can see here, 3 days shy of 90 years old. I had to laugh at her obituary. It said, "It is told how she converted her husband, who was born in Missouri, from a strong Democrat to a good Republican before he died. She was not a woman advocate, but had a strong personality, apparently." Let's talk about Almeron Hill, along with his Sarah, his wife, one of the earliest pioneers in Oregon. For the first 2 years of their marriage, they lived on a farm. I forget the exact state. Geez, I wish I would have wrote that down. But Almeron was a bullwhacker, aka ox wagon driver, for the famous Jesse Applegate. If you're not familiar with Jesse Applegate, he was one of the leaders for the Great Migration of 1843. The Hills actually served host for Dr. Marcus Whitman and were friends. They traveled the plains together to Oregon. Almeron and Sarah's first house was a log cabin with a dirt floor and one iron pot to cook. Allegedly a prized relic in the family. Almeron was one of the first men to enlist in the Cayuse War of 1848. If you remember from my first video that was in Union Cemetery, I talked about the Whitman massacre that took place in 1847. Almeron and Dr. Whitman were obviously friends. Probably was a little bit of a revenge tour in mind there. He briefly went to California during the gold rush of 1849, but he would come back to Oregon. Almeron actually lived close to an Indian tribe, and they were friendly to each other, to the point where Almeron learned their language. He's very active in the community and state affairs, and he also donated this land for the cemetery we're at today. Here we have Chester William Noyes. I believe that's how you say it. He was born in 1836 in Erie, Pennsylvania. He's actually a Civil War veteran, as you can see. In 1861, he would enlist in the Iowa 15th Infantry Regiment, and he would side with the Union during the Civil War. Couldn't find anything when he exactly came to Oregon, but he was married to a woman named Priscilla Noyes. Chester, unfortunately, would have a sad ending. Found a clipping from the Daily Oregon Statesman, and that shows that Chester died at the Oregon State Insane Asylum from a skull fracture while attempting to escape through one of the building windows. He was thought to be there 7 years prior to this. And next to Chester, there's a wooden marker. I don't exactly know if it's a grave or not, but I thought it was kind of interesting. It survived out here, just a random wooden post with a piece of rebar on the back. Right here we have Adair D Gilpin. He was born in 1820. A little interesting tidbit of information. He was arrested at his home on December 2nd in 1862 as a spy. He was released on February 7th in 1863 by the order of the Secretary of War. His son was Private William Barney Gilpin, who is right here. He was born in 1842. He was a Civil War veteran as well, and an odd fellow. He looks like he was in the 5th Kentucky Cavalry, CSA. So right here, we have a marker called the Woodman of the World grave markers. I really didn't understand what they were, so I started reading about them. They were a fraternal organization that provided financial security to those in need. It was started in 1890, and what it was they just sold insurance, and it was dedicated to high-risk jobs, like mining, for example, back in the day. Their motto was, "No woodman shall rest in an unmarked grave." The markers were actually free of charge, and most often they were a tree stump, as you could see here. And they could get pretty elaborate and detailed in design, as you could see with this one. In 1920, however, the price of markers became very expensive, so the society stopped providing them. Alright, gather around, children. I found a weird one during my research, but I could not find the headstone or the grave of this guy. He'd be Robert Mossbank Wood, and he'd be part of the Jennings family. They kind of traveled together, but someone posted an odd death certificate, and this kind of sparked my interest. People are nice enough, again, to post on findagrave.com. And his death certificate was on there, and it said hole in the heart, stabbed with a blunt object or something. So I'm like, all right, was this a murder? It's kind of interesting. I also bought a book from Ken Bilderback called A Creek with No Name, and that had a ton of information in it about this case, among other things in the city of Gaston. I'll put it in the little description at the bottom of the video. Anyways, a couple named Harold and Mary Jennings arrived in Oregon from England a few years before 1900. They first lived in California, working their way up the coast though. They were accompanied by Robert, who was also from England. Robert and the couple got along so well, they went in 50-50 on a farmhouse in Gaston. The work actually piled up pretty quickly because Harold and Mary had a child at the time. So they decided to hire a man named Alan George Harry McDonald. Harry got a rep quickly for being a barroom fighter. Rumors began actually that he was on the run for murdering a man in California. What Harold and Robert noticed most was Alan couldn't keep his eyes off of Mary, Harold's wife, to the point Harold fired him. Alan, unemployed in July of 1905, drank too much liquid courage at a local saloon. It was obvious he had deep feelings for Mary and was jealous. However, he wasn't jealous of Harold, the husband. His anger was directed towards Robert for some reason. He was sure that Robert and Mary were having a romantic love affair. So Alan decided to get his gun, make his way up to the Jennings farmhouse to kill Robert. So Alan gets there, he points a gun at Robert, he grabs Mary, and forces her at gunpoint up to the farmhouse. Word reached a marshal, then the sheriff got involved among several townspeople. One of these townspeople was Harry Russell, who made his way into the house to the stairwell where a gun exchange took place. Russell would suffer some gunpowder burns to his face from the gunfight and retreated. Alan would retreat upstairs to one of the bedroom and started writing a suicide note. He would then tie a string with one side to his toe and the other to the trigger of the shotgun. He put the shotgun end in his mouth and blew his head off. With Alan out of the picture, everything seemed back to normal, so we thought. Rumors continued that Mary and Robert were having an affair. In 1908, Robert Wood was found dead with a hole in his heart near the barn of the Jennings. Evidently, a blunt instrument was used that penetrated to the mid of his heart. Harold, the husband of Mary, accused the most unlikely suspect, the farm cows. He said this because Robert would use a stick to prod the cows into the pasture, kind of move them along. And surely the cows pinned him against the wall of the barn and impaled him. So Harold goes on to say that the bloody stick should be in the barn, and the stick was indeed found inside the barn with only 1.5 inches of blood on the tip for some reason. The problem also was Robert was found 30 feet away from the barn. A deep wound that hit the heart and passed through the ribs just kind of raised more questions. Again, if you want to know more about that story, buy that book, Creek with No Name. I believe that nobody was found guilty. I know they did all these, you know, trials and stuff, but Harold and Mary would eventually move out of the Gaston area because the rumors just got so hot for them that they moved to Portland eventually. All right, we're gonna do our little mini tour of Hill Cemetery. Just start from one of the furthest corners from my truck. Got the whole place to ourselves. Actually, I had to come here twice. I came yesterday and it just got a little crowded and just had to kind of bolt. Guy with the camera talking the gravestones looks a little odd. I did not find the one individual I was super excited about. And that was Peter McIntosh, the father of cheese. Don't laugh. Very important to the area. I could talk about him in a little bit. I keep thinking I'll come across his grave, but unfortunately not. I've gone through the entire cemetery and I can't find him. Another thing I noticed as well was the pictures, like on Find a Grave or some picture people post on Google, sometimes some pics. Because the headstones don't exactly look the same as they used to. A lot of them are just weathered or they just broke, maybe vandalism. I'm guessing vandalism. We saw that with the Lewis Pioneer Cemetery. Well, here we have a U.S. Army vet right there. Died recently. But yeah, I mean, it happens. So sometimes the pictures of the grave don't match the actual location present day, and that's been a bit of a challenge for me. But fortunately, we could just look up their stories, talk about them a little bit, and enjoy the view, like we did with Mr. Wood's story, the guy with the hole in his heart. And I did not find his tombstone either. I did find a Wood family, but his name wasn't there next to him. I also found a McIntosh, but it wasn't the father of cheese. Very depressing day. As you can see, that's where you'll come in at the cemetery. It's only one way in, one way out, and it's a very narrow road. Kind of neat. Got a bunch of stones for their grave. Over their grave. Got down here. Very patriotic. Got a nice little design there. Salmon, deer. Who's this popular person? Hood. Oh man, I'm not even gonna attempt to say that last name. Hoodeneville. That's an interesting last name. Are you serious? There he is. Alright, I have to stop the video and find my notes. This made the trip well worth it. 2 days of travel. I had to come out here and we found him. Peter Duncan McIntosh. Father of the cheese industry, as you can see. I can't believe this. There should be a giant pillar erected in this man's honor. His grave is a bit hidden, overgrown with grass, as you can see. A lot of these pioneer cemeteries are pretty neglected, so You're seeing it live now. So a little bit about Peter. He was born in 1861 in Ontario. His family actually immigrated from Scotland to Canada back in the day. If it wasn't for this man, Tillamook probably wouldn't be so famous for their cheese. And that's because in Ontario, he would learn cheese making and actually operate a factory. Eventually, he would operate a factory in Freeport, Washington. Allegedly, this was the best cheese in the Pacific Northwest at the time. However, in 1894, a big flood disrupted operations in this area. And there was a little rumor going around in the cheese industry about a town called Tillamook, and they had cows that were milk machines. However, Tillamook was focused on butter production during this time. It wasn't until two cheesemakers who were well known in the area would entice McIntosh to come to Tillamook, since he was considered the best cheesemaker west of Wisconsin. By 1915, they had 25 factories in Tillamook. Peter would die in 1940 at the age of 79. Till this day, Tillamook uses McIntosh's cheese recipe. Alright, man. The trip is complete. I'm so happy I found that. I was getting a little annoyed. That was the only reason I came to this one. I had to find him. Plus, who doesn't like cheese either? Lactose intolerant people, I bet. But missing out. You can see it's a nice sunny day in April. Thankfully in Oregon, it's freaking 20 degrees at night, and then it gets up to 70 by 1 o'clock during this time. Very confusing weather. And you can see a lot of overgrowth. I actually almost stepped on a headstone. There was so much overgrowth on it. It was just hidden. So I tried to clear it off a little bit. Like I said, I don't know if anyone's really taking care of this. Oh, what do we got here? Degenerates. Moving on. Haul down here. All by themselves next to the road. Oh, man. Could be some headstones under all that brush. There's an area way over there in the corner that actually had tree branches all over some of the headstones. Gilpin, we talked about them. Guy that was accused of being a spy. We got a woodsman of the world in the back, right in front of us. What we got here? I don't know if that's a pet grave, maybe. Not really sure. Looks like it's got like a little doggy on the top. Did see the last name Blum during my research, but couldn't find much information on him. There's that last name again. Hood and Phil. Let's just go with that. Very popular last name in the cemetery. Oh, there's Chester. We talked about him. He's one of those wooden markers. It's a nice little grave underneath a tree, all nice and shaded. 1843 Oregon Trail pioneer. I missed this one, Lennox. So it's got that classic pioneer with the horses pulling the wagon, or look like horses, maybe donkeys, I'm not sure. This is pretty common in the cemetery, where it kind of breaks free from here. Don't know if it's vandalism. Based on the last cemetery, vandalism is usually the #1 cause. Actually, it's funny, this was my second morning coming here. I'm glad I did, because I got the whole place to myself. Well, we had the whole place to ourselves. And I noticed in the sort of parking area, there was like a bunch of sticks piled. Looks like somebody had a little bonfire, mini bonfire last night. This is where a lot of the pioneers seem to be buried, close to this tree, close to the hills, head tombstone. A lot of hills in this area. A lot of older ones, pretty weathered. Some of them do have a lot of cracks down the center. It looks like somebody tried to repair it, so that's good to see. But some of them are just so wore down, no clue who they are, unfortunately. And like I said, it's kind of a reoccurring theme. Nice one. This one's holding up. Like this one, for example, it's hard for me to read. Sometimes the camera really brightens things up, and I can kind of tell when I go home and watch the video. Who's this all by themselves over in the woods? Matilda Lewis. Oh, kind of recently, 2005. There we go. U.S. Army, World War II. Get that off there. Here's an example. Like, it's not the specific pillar style tombstone, but usually you'll see this one and it'll look beautiful and perfect in the picture, and then you come to look at it live and it's fallen off its little base. Right there as well, you can see that uprising. The earth just kind of pushes it up, which is crazy for how much they weigh. This one right here is a good example. I can't even read the name. Ooh. I'm just happy we found the father of cheese. What a great day. Here's one that's kind of hidden. I think this is the one I almost stepped on. Here is a pretty elaborate one. This one. No, not that old. I was wondering what all the toys were. It's usually an indication it's a child or an infant. Definitely has one of the most beautiful graves here with all the flowers underneath the tree. pretty much at the other end of the cemetery. You can see the hills, markers over there underneath that big tree. A lot of Lamberts here as well. This one's over where you park. I know sometimes they reserve them for future burials. So there's an expansion slot and there's an expansion slot on the left and the right. So I'm guessing that is reserved for an entire family. So that is pretty much it for Hill Cemetery. A lot of famous people you never heard of, as I said early in the video. A lot of interesting stories. I highly suggest you come out. It's quite peaceful. As you can see, gorgeous view. Just us and the birds. Got a little park bench there too. So you should come out with a glass of wine and bring your cheese in honor of Peter McIntosh. So thank you for watching. I appreciate your time. If you guys have any recommendation on pioneer cemeteries in the Oregon state, one day I'll make my way to Washington. It's a long ways out. I just started this, but I hope you enjoy the channel. Like I said, feel free to comment, say, hey, you got to visit this cemetery. It's got this famous person buried there, or any pioneers. That's mainly what I'm focused on, is pioneers, not so much of the, you know, the kind of ones after 1900, if you will. So thanks for watching and have a great day.